Is it recorded already?
Okay, already, Pak.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, the second wave of classic transnational Indonesian exploitation cinema. It's a very long title, I know. And good afternoon in Indonesia and good morning in London and UK. My name is Eki Manjaya. I'm a faculty member of in BINUS University at Film Department, and I'm very happy to be the host today because I think we have a very interesting topic and a very interesting speakers here. And here we already have Pitums, the co-founder of Mondo Macabro DVD. If you know about Pitums, especially if you love exploitation, B-movies, cult movies, yeah, from Indonesian back in 80s and 90s, yeah. And then we also have Dr. Iain Robert Smith, yeah, senior lecturer in film studies at King's College London, and he is also the expert of cult movies, exploitation cinema, and global cult movies in general. So I will do the introduction because probably some of you don't know about the context why we call it second wave of classic transnational Indonesian cinema. Yeah? When was the second wave happen? Especially because in the I think it's 2000s, late 2000s or early 2010s, I got this book by Peter, and Joko Anwar told me about this book, and it has a chapter about Indonesian global transnational exploitation films. And then back in I think it's 2007, 2005, and then I tried to, and then when I did my master in Amsterdam, I found Mystic in Bali, yeah. Mystic in Bali, it's called Cult Videotheek, yeah, near my campus, University from Amsterdam, and then I found some Indonesian titles circulating in the European countries, in the US, and so on. For example, we have this Satan Slave, yeah, Satan Slave. Is it a bootleg, yeah, double feature, and then special silencer, the old one, and the old version, and then the Warrior by Mondo Macabro.
Hey!
And of course the Lady Terminator, yeah. And the good thing about Mondo Macabro and also Mystic in Bali, the first movie I saw in European country. And the good thing about Mondo Macabro, because Pete and his friends, his colleague, they did a very good package, yeah, including the special features, interview with the producer, with Barry Prima, Dida Kando, and so on. Yes, and then we have this kind of video of DVD. Probably for Gen Z, you don't know what is it. This is a DVD. So long before OTT, we have VCD and then Laserdisc and then DVD, and the industry in the Europe and in the US still happen, yeah, but in Indonesia it's already gone. So it's particular this one is like the just copy paste of this comic book.
Yeah. I think that's a pirate release, by the way.
It's pirated, yeah. And then of course from Trauma, this is Stabilizer, and I was very lucky to meet the Lloyd Kaufman and got his signature. And then of course various female freedom fighters where Trauma did the redubbing, doing the redubbing. That's the phenomenon of the first wave of Indonesia global or Transnational Indonesian classic transnational exploitation Indonesian movies. And then later on, I learned that there are the second wave, and and then luckily I got involved. Yeah, the first one is this one. This is by Pete. Yeah, you did this very good job. Yeah, and then if I and then even the Mondo Macabro people, they did this what do you call it, booklet. It's very nice. Yeah, actually. So people will know the context. Yeah, to have the big pictures. And then I got this one as well, Santet. Santet 1 and 2. Santet means black magic or something. And with also a very good package, yeah, from Vinegar Syndrome. And then I got involved with many projects, yeah, by some DVD distributors, but I don't think I can spill it right now. But probably Pete could spill some new projects, upcoming projects, yeah, later, yeah. Okay, let's start. I hope you already understand the context. So Pete, I just wonder, first of course, some of the audience know about you, but probably some of them, the other one, and they don't know about you and Mondo Macabro, yeah, in general. So I'm just wondering, when the first time did you encounter with Indonesian films, and because you did a good writing at the book, yeah. So when did you at the first time watch the movie and then decided to write a chapter about that, about Indonesian films? Yeah.
Well, oh dear, sorry. Well, there's a long answer and a short answer, and I guess the shorter version of the long answer would be that we have to go back really to to before I saw any Indonesian films, really, where when I was a kid, going to the local, what we used to call flea pit cinema, if you understand that term, where they, fairly low rent place where they would play films that were not on the circuit. They were films that would probably second, third, or whatever run. Okay, they weren't new releases, and I saw all kinds of things there, all kinds of strange movies. And I mean, I started with Hammer films, for example. I mean, I think the first one I saw was Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and I was too young to see it. It was an X-rated film, I think. In those days, in the UK, that was 16 X-rated. I think it's now 18 in the UK. And I kind of got into this kind of, I mean, this is obviously thinking back afterwards. I didn't think this at the time, but there was a kind of a culty kind of feeling about these things. I know these were popular films, but there was something about seeing them in this sleazy cinema in the dark, with small groups of people, that you kind of felt that there was an alternate or an alternative way of appreciating cinema, and possibly an alternative form of cinema. And I'm not talking about underground films. I was aware of those, but I'm talking about commercial underground, films that were made to make money, but that kind of slipped below the radar in a sense. They weren't necessarily noticed. And I don't know, that kind of started me off, getting interested in things which were off center, or off the mainstream, if you like. Okay, off the UK English language mainstream anyway. And living in areas where I lived in North London, there was, you was aware that there was a whole alternative cinema, like there was Indian video shops, okay, and where I lived there was Turkish video shops, Greek video shops. This is obviously later from the period I'm talking about as a kid. So I became aware of the idea that there were films from places, outside Hollywood, if you like, if you want to call it like that. And they were interesting. And I knew there was an art cinema because the London Film Festival, they would play films, even films from Indonesia, but they were very much art house kind of films, which I imagined, and I think I'm right, is that the average cinema goer in those countries didn't go and see those films, okay? And I was more interested in the films that they did go and see, the popular ones, yeah? So, you know, I kind of got into looking for those movies, and they would be movies from America, underground movies, Herschel Gordon Lewis, you know, all that stuff. And then around about, I suppose, in the 80s, maybe, my timing's not very good, video appeared. And initially, video in the UK was very much, it was kind of not approved of. I mean, the big film companies didn't approve of it because they thought it was a way of losing money. And the video stores appeared, but they always appeared in kind of more working class areas. You know, they weren't mainstream. They weren't respectable. It wasn't respectable. Okay, and I think that's good. You know, because I think when cinema gets respectable, then it starts to lose, for me, lose some interest. Okay, and then I avoided going in video stores initially because I thought, well, you know, it's all porn or something. You know, all crap films. But eventually, I discovered there was all kinds of interesting things there. You know, Mario Bava movies, which some of which had just have played in English cinemas, but had vanished. You know, you never saw these films. The films I'm talking about, you never saw them on television. So video suddenly opened up this world. You know, and to get back to your question, with Indonesian cinema, I mean, I was aware that it existed. Okay, obviously, but I was aware that there was a kind of horror film, you know, B movie, whatever you want to call it, aspect of it. I mean, I would read, you know, film magazines and fanzines and so on, and some more respectable ones like I think Midi Minuit Fantastique, the French publication, and they used to list. It was an infrequent publication, so it didn't come out every month, but they would list movies, you know, that had been released in countries around the world that related to this fantastical kind of side of cinema. And they would just have a title translated usually, and a brief synopsis. And I thought, my God, there's vampire films in, you know, in Malaysia. There's, you know, horror films in Indonesia and so on, which, you know, I just knew nothing about. And then around about that time, I think it was 85, there was a book published, the Aurum Horror Encyclopedia, the Aurum Encyclopedia of Horror, which was edited by Phil Hardy, sadly no longer with us. Who I met and knew, and it was an important figure in this kind of thing, and possibly one who's been sidelined, you know. And in that book, they actually dealt with some Indian cinema. They dealt with South and Latin American and Filipino cinema, and also Indonesian films. And because, you know, where are you going to see these films in the UK? You can't see them; they weren't on video. But I was still looking and probably hoping, in an insane way, that I would find a, you know, Indonesian video, a copy of an Indonesian film or video, and I did, and it was The Warrior, Barry Prima, and this was something that was, you just saw it everywhere. I don't think it ever played in cinemas in the UK, that film, but it's certainly played on. It was certainly available on video, and I remember getting this tape, being quite excited. You know, it was sold as a kind of martial arts movie, you know, in the Bruce Lee or Bruceploitation kind of area. You know, I got back, took it home, got back, put it on, and the one thing I remember, and I remember particularly now, looking back, is that film was, like most Indonesian movies, was widescreen scope 235. On the video, they just zoomed in, so they were just showing the bit in the middle. In other words, yeah. And as you know, with martial arts movies, when you've got two guys or whatever having a punch up, they're probably on either sides of the widescreen image, so you're only getting the bit in the middle. So they would zoom from left to, you know, pan from left to right to try and keep the action. So I had real problems with that film. I was absolutely delighted to get hold of it and to see it to an extent, but I was only really seeing 20% of the film, you know. But I could see that there was something different about that film, you know, that there was something, you know, kind of behind it all. There was a culture there that was being expressed in some kind of, possibly debased, I don't know, but in some kind of a way, there was something that was different. And I kind of thought, well, this is kind of what I've been looking for a long time, you know. And it was obviously a developed film culture. I was able to find a few books and articles, mostly in French, actually. The English speakers didn't get onto this for quite some time. And I discovered about the Indonesian comic books and all that kind of stuff and their relationship with cinema. I read about Susanna and all that kind of stuff. and obviously the other Rappy films came out also on video, you know, the Warrior 2 and the Warrior 3 and so on. So I could see that there was a whole thing, and I recognized the the Rappy signature, the Rappy name, the Rappy, you know, in the opening sequence to all their films, there's that kind of gamelan kind of sounding thing, you know, which there's gone now. They've got rid of that, sadly. And it was, to me, that was like when I was a kid, when I was talking about earlier, going to the cinema. I remember that when the American International logo came up, we didn't know anything about the films because there was nobody talking about these films. I'm talking about the late 60s, early 70s. When the American International logo came up, I kind of felt a sense of excitement. We're going to get something good. And it's kind of the same with the Rappy logo, actually. When you see that coming up at the start of the film, it's like, you know who Rappy are. You know, they have this identity. And I know they've done comedies and all kinds of things, but there's still this major identity that they're involved in, you know, mystic films, martial arts films, you know, horror movies, that kind of thing. And that was kind of exciting. So when the option came to write a book about this kind of stuff, I mean, that came about, it's a long process I won't go into now, but we wrote down a list of countries we were going to cover. And Indonesia was definitely one of them. And I remember particularly that there's a guy who worked on the Aurum Horror encyclopedias that I mentioned earlier. There was a guy called Paul Willem. Iain may know who he is. He, again, sadly, no longer with us. And although he was an academic, he was a real film fan. He liked a huge range of movies. And I remember him saying to me one time, "Oh, you should look at Indonesia. There's some amazing films there. If you like horror movies and gory movies, you know, the best ones you'll find are in Indonesia." And that was some years before I saw The Warrior. So it was planted in my mind, this seed about Indonesian movies for a long, long time. And then, of course, you know, eventually we managed to raise a budget from local TV, from a UK TV station. And I got the chance to go to Indonesia and, you know, meet some of these people. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, okay, I think I've answered the question and probably several others, but there you go. That's how it happened. The Warrior. In other words, The Warrior was the first one I saw.
The Warrior. Yeah. For those who don't understand, The Warrior is Jaka Sembung, the Jaka Sembung.
Jaka Sembung.
Jaka Sembung is very, very popular in Indonesia. Very prima. The thing is, Pete, loving to watch the movies and becoming a fan is one thing, but deciding that you want, okay, I will do the digital restore of this film and then recirculate the films is another thing. So how and why? What is the turning point? And then when you started to, because you also distributed some global exploitation films like from Argentina, Mexico, and Bollywood and so on. But why and how did you decide to, okay, I will do the digital restoration of The Warrior and then Lady Terminator and so on, and then do the global redistribution of this kind of films?
Again, it's kind of probably a long and convoluted story, but I have to credit, there's a couple of people I have to credit. I mean, Nigel Wingrove is one, who Redemption Films, who was quite well known at the time in the UK. And I guess we're talking here early 90s, maybe. I mean, he might know more about this than me, but I met Nigel and when he was starting off, and I think we'd already published the Immoral Tales book, which is about European horror movies. And we had a season, we had a season at the National Film Theatre with these kinds of films. And we brought Jean Rollin over, I was a friend of Jean, or had become a friend of Jean. And Nigel contacted me and said he wanted to talk about, just to pick my brains, I suppose, initially, when he was starting the Redemption label. And it kind of interested me. I thought, hey, I've been collecting these videos for years. It's actually, and I always assumed that it was big companies, with, glass and steel kind of, high rise kind of tower offices, people with important amounts of money. I didn't realize that just some enthusiast like Nigel could do this, really. And that planted a seed. And I think And then, and the second one, I guess, was when a guy called Paul Woods, who was a publisher, a local publisher at the time, contacted me. And when I met him, again, I met him through Nigel, I think. And he said, "Do you want to write a book about horror movies?" And I thought, well, not really. There's loads of them. But, you know, we thought, actually, if we concentrate on this particular area, you know, the European exploitation movies of the 60s or 70s and so on, that's something that possibly hasn't been covered in great depth. And again, you know, I could vaguely deal with French, Italian, Spanish language. So, you know, there was a lot of source material there, a lot of stuff which we hadn't had discussed in the UK. So I kind of put those two things together. There's all these kinds of, you know, there's these kinds of there's these contacts that I'd made, and there was an area of interest, and an area that interested me, because at the time, you know, there was a huge, I mean, like all the people we talk about now, Dario Argento, Mario Bava, and so on, those films were available for video release, and quite often for not a huge amount of money. I mean, people didn't know Mario Bava was, you know, now it's like, you know, it's gone the other way, probably possibly in a bad way, you know. So you thought, well, it's possible to, there's a whole wealth of material there to be mined. So, you know, you can see this going on for some while. So it's worth investing time and money in. And again, there's a lot of this seems to have happened at the same time, but it was a slightly longer period. We pitched, I met Andy Stark, who was working as a video editor. And he said, "Hey, I've read your book, and you know, I know these films and so on. I think there's a TV show in this." And we contacted Late Night Channel 4, which, as you know, in the UK is a big alternative channel. And we pitched a series to them, and they said, "Yeah, okay." And that was the first series we did there, which is basically European movies. And after we'd done that, they said, "Hey, how about you know, have you got anything else?" And we said, "Well, you know," and I'd had this Mondo Macabro idea for a long time, you know, like going to the places outside Europe, the US, you know, places that we know about, and looking at their film industries. I'd been to Japan, so I knew a little bit about Japanese cinema. I've been to India, so I knew a little bit about that. So we put this kind of list together, and bish bosh, there you go. Is that an answer? Probably not. But in the process of doing the TV thing, this is important. We met a lot of film producers and rights holders, people who owned movies, and I think with both the Immoral Tales program and the Mondo Macabro, we licensed from them the film, and we also licensed like clip rights, you know, so that we could cut them up and make the show. You know, it's a kind of common thing in the video business at the time. You have clip rights, you know, so you can use bits of the film in another form, you know. So put all that together, and you think, hey, you got a video label, you got the book, you got the video label, and the TV series. You know, I'm the next Harvey Weinstein. No, cut that bit. But you know what I mean? You know, it all fitted together in some kind of way.
Okay. So how many Indonesian titles did you already redistribute? Is it 6 or 7 something?
I can't honestly remember, and I should have sat down. Well, I mean, we licensed quite a few that we didn't release, like Pangabdi Setan, Satan's Slave. Satan's Slave. We licensed that, but we didn't actually release it for all kinds of reasons. And there was quite a lot of films that we didn't put out. But I know, and I don't know if we even released all the other Rappy films that we were licensed. I can't remember, but it was the initial run was 6 or 7. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously that was over a number of years. I mean, I think Mystics in Bali was probably one of the last ones. The Lady Terminator was certainly one of the first ones. I mean, this is connected with when we actually got a US distribution.
Yeah.
Because the UK distribution is quite small. You don't make a lot of money. And I was aware, certainly when dealing with Rappy, when we ordered the first few films from them, and this was Gaup Santana we were dealing with.
Gaup Santana, yeah.
Gaup Santana, yeah, who was producer obviously on all those films. The first masters that we got from them were full frame video masters, you know, square things. And we said, well, we want the widescreen. They didn't have them at the time. I'm sure Gaup won't mind me telling this story. So we actually brought the negatives of those films over to the UK, and scanned them and restored them here. And that, in a sense, that was a big, that was a kind of a big break on us doing too many more, because most of the Indonesian producers that we were able to contact, and there's only really three, isn't there? There's Parkit, there's Suraya, and there's Rappi. Okay.
Yeah.
And they were all really nice. I mean, Mr. Rampunjabi, Parkit, was a very nice guy, and he was quite open about it. He said, "We don't have film material on a lot of the films that you're talking about." And this was the issue really for us with releasing more. I'd have loved to have done more. I mean, I could go through a list of Indonesian movies in the genres that we're dealing with, and there's many that were of interest. But I'd see them on VCD copies, very often from Malaysia, where they're cut, but I'd still see there was a lot there, there was something of interest there. But finding the rights holders of those movies, getting materials that were actually releasable, was very, very hard. Okay. And I think this has changed recently, or changed in the last few years, because of the Indonesian cable station Flick, that's
Flick, yes.
Yeah, because they've remastered a lot of those films. I think this has been going on for 5 or 6 years, maybe longer. Is that right now? So suddenly a lot of these companies have releasable, have remastered their films, and they have releasable versions that we could talk about. So this is one of the reasons why you're getting, there's several reasons, but one of the reasons why you're getting in America a number of companies that very recently have got into this Indonesian thing, because suddenly there's masters that they can release that didn't exist before. Okay, so anyway,
that's why you re-released this one, the special
silence as well. That's Parkit, and I wanted to do. There's at least half a dozen, well, more actually, but there's at least half a dozen Parkit films, which are great. Jungle, Virgin Force, and so on. I don't know. There's many. Okay. And unfortunately, they, I managed to contact them. I mean, I think I'd probably been trying for a while, but having met Mr. Punjabi, maybe that helped and so on. But they sent me a list of stuff that they had. Most of it not of a lot of huge interest. 5 Deadly Angels and so on. It's okay, but it's not, yeah, but it's not quite, and then they had that under the Indonesian title, the Special Silencers, and of course, this is one of the top films that I remember when I saw that film initially because it was available on video on VHS in Holland, in the Netherlands. So that's how we could see it. Again, compromised shape and so on, but you could see that there was something special there, something unusual. It was not the normal kind of film, So I was delighted, over the moon, to be able to release that. It's slightly cut, that version. I mean, none of the violence or the gore or I say sex, it's very mild in Indonesian movies, but none of that is cut. But there were some weird bits and pieces were cut, but probably for length, because they put it on TV. It maybe needs to be shorter or something. But it was great. We really appreciated doing that one. I enjoyed doing that one.
Okay.
And we got other ones, and we got some more coming out as well later.
Yeah, that's my next question. Could you please spill some of the titles, or save it for later?
No, only one.
Okay.
And I can't remember the Indonesian title. Hungry Snake Woman.
Oh, Nyi Blorong. Is it Nyi Blorong?
No. It's it begins with this guy going into the jungle, and he meets the Susanna comes out of the cave, and she says that he's got to kill 3 virgins and she'll give him eternal life. And I'm sure you know the film I'm talking about. I just can't remember the title.
Hungry Snake Woman. Okay.
Yeah, Angry Snake. Is it Hungry Snake or Angry? The English title, there seem to be 2 or 3 English titles. Anyway, that one, we're doing that one, which is a great film. It's really
okay.
good.
Probably last question for Pete. Yeah, sorry, Ian, for waiting a little longer. In Indonesia, the DVD industry is already gone. So, do you re-release these old classic films for international fans or audience, or do you also, of course there are some collectors with DVD or Blu-ray, but do you also target the Indonesian fans for the new releases?
No, because we in the film business you license by territory usually,
Okay.
and we license only the US. So we only have rights for the US. So we only distribute in America, in North America. Because of Amazon, eBay, and so on, obviously it's possible for people to buy these films from other countries, and I'm sure that's going on, but it's not through us. We don't distribute them to these other countries. It's quite a kind of important to say that. Because, and also I know that there's no video market really in Indonesia. I mean, there used to be a VCD market, I guess, probably. I remember when I was in Jakarta many years ago, there was I found quite a lot of laser discs of Susanna films and stuff, you know, which is kind of interesting. But there didn't seem to be a huge video market there.
Okay. Thank you, Smith. So let's move to Iain. We'll get back to with the Q&A session with the audience, and we will have Q&A session after Iain do the presentation. So just bear in mind that just keep your questions, or you can put in the chat box. Thank you. Okay. Dr. Iain Robert Smith is famous with because you coined the term remakesploitation, right? Remakesploitation, and you also your research deal with with the global cult movies as well. So probably you have another perspective, especially particularly comparing with other global cult movies or global exploitation movies. Please, the time is yours, Iain.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, thank you, Eki. And yeah, it's really great to be on a panel, with yourself, Eki, but also with Pete, who's really helped, I guess, inspire a lot of the research that I've done as an academic. Kind of, I guess, coming slightly later, watching that series on Channel 4, buying the book, buying all the DVDs, and then now buying all the Blu-rays. So that's definitely helped shape me as a scholar. So yeah, I've got some slides just to kind of talk through a few things in terms of relating the kind of Indonesian exploitation cinema in relationship to what you were describing there, Eki, the kind of remakesploitation. So there's this kind of phenomenon where there are kind of reworkings of American films that we see across kind of Indonesian cinema of the kind of 80s and 90s, films like Srigala reworking Friday the 13th, and of course that's recently come out on Blu-ray from Television. You've got, of course, Lady Terminator. You've got The Intruder, Pembalasan Rambo, reworking Rambo First Blood Part 2, and of course Satan's Bed, which Pete briefly mentioned just earlier, which in some ways is kind of reworking Nightmare on Elm Street. And so this is definitely a kind of important phenomenon within Indonesian cinema, but it's also a significant phenomenon just within loads of kind of popular film industries around the world in that period. So there's this kind of international phenomenon of remakesploitation of kind of local industries taking elements from Hollywood films and from other industries and reworking and adapting and kind of localizing them and adding kind of local elements and kind of adapting it to the local context. And so this is something that is related to the kind of broader processes of Americanization. There's a quote there from Todd Gitlin saying that if there's a global village, it speaks American, wears jeans, drinks Coke, eats at the Golden Arches, walks in swoosh shoes, plays electric guitar, recognizes Mickey Mouse, James Dean, E.T., Bart Simpson, R2-D2, and Pamela Anderson. So like sometimes that's talked about as McDonaldization, sometimes it's talked about as Disneyification, sometimes it's talked about as Coca-Colonization. But this idea of kind of American popular culture is sometimes seen as a kind of colonial presence or a kind of imperial presence. And of course, there's all manner of academic debates around these movements. But yeah, there's a kind of framing of American culture as being a kind of form of cultural imperialism, of kind of just spreading American culture around the world. And then that, of course, also spreads kind of American ideology. But in my work, what I've been trying to do is to look at, to get away from that kind of top-down, fairly simplistic idea of McDonaldization, to see, okay, yes, Hollywood films are playing all around the world, but then how are those elements being adapted and reworked and localized within those contexts? So it's coming out more of the debates around cultural hybridity. So seeing it less in terms of US cultural imperialism and seeing it more in terms of cultural exchange and adaptation, while still being attentive to the power of US culture within this. This relates to something that Mary Pratt argues, that while subjugated peoples cannot readily control what emanates from the dominant culture, they do determine to varying extents what they absorb into their own and what they use it for. And that's an argument she uses to talk about literature, the ways in which travel writing and the spread of the English language around the world. But it's also, I think, relevant to how American culture spreads around the world, and then how are the various different industries around the world absorbing some elements of Hollywood and some elements of US culture, and how is it being used and adapted. So that's what I was doing in this book, The Hollywood Meme, which would look at a film like this. This is a Turkish film from 1973 called Uchtev Adam, Three Mighty Men. And it's so Captain America teams up with Santo from Mexican cinema to kind of battle an evil Spider-Man who's running a smuggling operation in Istanbul. And so it's that process of kind of cultural adaptation, appropriation, and kind of reworking that fascinated me. Also relates to what Ana Lopez argues, that Hollywood's international presence has had acute effects not only on Hollywood itself, but on all other filmmaking nations. So I think part of what we're seeing in Indonesian cinema in this period, in this kind of reworking of Hollywood horror films and action films and thrillers, is something that there are parallels going on in lots of other industries. So for example, when Nightmare on Elm Street is being reworked in Indonesia, there are also reworkings in India, Kuni Murda. There's also a Mahakal, which again, that's one that Mondo Macabro brought out on DVD. Yeah, of course, with Lady Terminator, we're also seeing films like Bruno Mattei doing Terminator 2, or sometimes known as Shocking Dark. Of course, when Batman is playing around the world, we're seeing Mexican reworking, The Batwoman, which has recently been restored on Blu-ray released by Indicator. In the Philippines, you've got films like James Batman, in which Dolphy plays a dual role as both Batman and James Bond. There's also, Turkish reworkings of Batman. So I think, part of what I want to kind of highlight just briefly today is the ways in which there are parallels between what you're seeing in the kind of Indonesian industry of the 70s through to the 90s, that you're also seeing in Turkey and other film industries around the world. So Savaş Arslan, in his book on cinema in Turkey, he says, when one deals with the history of cinema in a non-Western country, the story always starts with how cinema as a Western medium is first exhibited and practiced in this non-Western country. Since the technology is imported, any non-Western national cinema naturally reflects the films and equipment available to filmmakers. So he uses that to kind of explain why there was such a preponderance of remaking of Hollywood films within the history of Turkish cinema. and then the ways in which those have been adapted. He talks about them being Turkified, and there's kind of parallel terms across the world. So in India, they talk about it as kind of Indianization. So it's kind of taking elements from a Hollywood film and then adding Indian elements, whether that's adding songs, whether it's expanding the length, adding extra narratives. There's these ideas that you have to kind of localize it for the domestic culture. This is something that Jem Kaya in his documentary Remix Ripoff, which is fantastic. It's all about Turkish cinema. He manages to kind of provide an amazing overview of all of these films, like, yeah, Dracula in Istanbul, Üç Dev Adam, as I've mentioned, reworkings of Death Wish, like Gelat, reworkings of E.T., these are all Turkish examples. Reworkings of Rambo, again, which there's a parallel there to be made with The Intruder and Peter O'Brien in that film. Touristomer in Star Trek. Again, a film that's kind of reworking elements of US television and bringing them to Turkish cinema. Reworkings of Some Like It Hot. Although, of course, I guess the key thing there is to always be aware that even the so-called Hollywood's originals are often themselves remakes. Like Some Like It Hot is not the original film. There's a French and German version of that story that came out before. So even though lots of people think, oh yeah, there's a Turkish remake of this, therefore it's the Turkish Some Like It Hot. But yeah, it's always good to bear in mind that the so-called Hollywood original is not the original. That Hollywood itself as an industry is constantly remaking and reworking elements from other filmmaking cultures. But yeah, we've got films like Şeytan, the Turkish reworking of The Exorcist, made by Metin Erksan, who had he made Dry Summer. He'd won a best film at the Berlin Film Festival. And then, was approached by Hulki Saner to do a remake of The Exorcist for the Turkish market, but one in which the Catholicism is replaced with Islam. And so it's a kind of localization of the story. And yet it's almost shot for shot, the rest of it, and it uses the same music and many of the same elements. And then perhaps most notoriously, you've got Dünyayı Kurtaran Adam, talked about as the Turkish Star Wars, because the director Çetin İnanç, he's not remaking Star Wars, he's actually using footage from Star Wars in his film. So he took a print of Star Wars, cut sequences from the film, edited them into his film, added music from Raiders of the Lost Ark, Flash Gordon, Battlestar Galactica. So just kind of making use of all these materials. And so, yeah, I guess part of what I find really interesting in this phenomenon is that sense of kind of American culture spreading around the globe that might be read as Coca-Colonization or Americanization. But then in each of these cases, it's being adapted and reworked by filmmakers in that industry, whether it's Luigi Cozzi in Italy making Star Crash, whether it's Kenji Fukasaku making Message from Space, whether you've got reworkings in Brazil, in Turkey. So like Star Wars is being kind of reworked and adapted in these industries in ways that are very much outside of the control of Lucasfilm and now Disney. But there's often in academia, there's a debate about the politics of this. Like, are these films just giving in to Hollywood's power? Like, there's always arguments that people make, like, we should be making local stories. We should be making authentic local stories. We shouldn't be making films that are reworking Hollywood films, because that is just giving in to Americanization and Coca-Colonization. But then sometimes people want to read these films as being more resistant. So, for example, you've got these Brazilian films that are, reworking Jaws and King Kong. Two academics wrote about these in terms of parodies. They say that parody is especially suited to the needs of the oppressed and powerless because it assumes the force of the dominant discourse only to deploy that force through a kind of artistic jujitsu against domination. The idea being that Hollywood is so powerful around the globe and dominates distribution networks. It dominates the kind of the economics of the industry. So one thing you can do is by parodying Hollywood, you're taking some of that power. You're taking the audience awareness of those films. You're taking the fact that and you're kind of using it against itself. Okay, we're going to make our own version of Star Wars or King Kong or Jaws, and we'll use the audience awareness of those films. We'll use the power of Hollywood, but we'll take it for ourselves. But one of the limitations of that argument, they say, is that the films ultimately offer a last laugh at Brazilian cinema. The laughter provoked by the parody rebounds against themselves and the audience. In other words, when you're watching a Brazilian parody of Jaws, the power isn't being taken away from Hollywood. The laughter is being focused on the Brazilian films, and people are laughing at its failures. And so they want to find resistance in these films. They want to find a way in which they're fighting back against Hollywood, and the films rarely do that. Nezi Erdogan, when he talks about Turkish Star Wars, says, yeah, when compared to the original, parody situates the parodic text at a superior level in comparison to the parody text. It's capable of inverting the original, making an object or agent of irony. But on the contrary, Dunyai Kertaranadam ridicules itself and puts Star Wars on the pedestal. So there's that kind of worry that this isn't really resistance against Hollywood that's fighting back against its power, that actually these are films that are seen as being kind of laughably bad and are treated as kind of so bad it's good. And therefore, what are the power relationships underpinning that process? And so in my work, I've tried to, have a slightly different model, one that's more about histories of globalization and cross-cultural exchange, and try and position these films less as kind of as resistance and less as examples of co-colonization, and more as examples of a kind of cultural dialogue, like an asymmetrical dialogue, but a kind of dialogue nonetheless, between industries, between cultures. And this relates to something that Edward Said argues in the preface to Orientalism. He says, rather than the manufactured clash of civilizations, we need to concentrate on the slow working together of cultures that overlap, borrow from each other, and live together in far more interesting ways than any abridged or inauthentic mode of understanding can allow. So I think these films, which are often kind of dismissed, often people that work for various kind of cultural organizations, there's often a sense that in which they're almost embarrassed that these films exist and that these films have been distributed around the world, and that these films are raising attention because of that association between kind of exploitation cinema and kind of low budgets. It's seen as kind of a lowbrow form of entertainment. It doesn't necessarily add much to the kind of cultural prestige of a national cinema. But nevertheless, I feel like these films are part of that history of globalization and cinema. And so, for me, that's the value of kind of positioning these films in relation to those global remakesploitation practices, because it is part of that kind of longer history of cross-cultural exchange, and it is something more complicated than just a simple process of co-colonization. That's me.
Thank you so much, Iain. I have two questions for you. The first of all is, as written also by Pete, in this book, it seems like almost at the same time, and in 80s there were some, like the race of exploitation films, all around the world. Was it like coincidence or what do you think? Because in Argentina, in Brazil, and then Hong Kong, Indonesia, Philippines, and so on. Almost at the same time, it seems for me, it's like this kind of films just, increase in the 80s. What do you think about that? Is it
No, I
coincidence
definitely
or?
agree. I think, all through the kind of, 70s, 80s, 90s, you're getting these kind of waves of kind of popular cinemas that are, making kind of low budget kind of exploitation films that are, I guess one of the kind of differences sometimes between the industries is whether they're primarily aimed at a kind of domestic circuit or whether they're partly aimed at a kind of export. So you see like so there's loads of parallels between the Turkish industry and the Indonesian industry, except the vast majority of those Turkish films are really for the domestic audience. They're really they tend not to be export or designed for export. They're not being designed to be dubbed into English. They're not being they're not being sold at international film festivals. Whereas, what you see in Indonesia seems almost closer to the kind of Hong Kong model of an industry that is, making films that will appeal to a local audience, but are also going to be sold internationally. I think it is a fascinating moment in the kind of history of popular cinema.
Okay.
I mean, if I could just chime in there, there's an issue in Indonesia, which is a special case in some ways in terms of what you're talking about, in that the Indonesian government, I think in the early 80s, actually invested in promoting the film business overseas. So, for example, they would pay for, certainly I know Gop Samtani used to go to Cannes and to MIFED. When I first went to MIFED in the 90s, I met many producers from other countries. And I think this is part of certainly when you're talking about Turkish cinema, I remember Junaid Arkin said it was Turkish cinema belonged to the people. They paid for it, they consumed it. It was never intended to go outside. And interestingly, with Setan, with the Exorcist, I was told by quite a few people in Turkey that when this appeared in cinemas, people thought it was The Exorcist. They didn't think, oh, this is a Turkish version of it. They heard of The Exorcist. It wasn't distributed, as far as I know, in Turkey. And they went to see Setan, and that was to them The Exorcist. So it's quite a different thing there, isn't there?
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you, Ian and Pete. Now let's move to the Q&A session. So if somebody from the floor wants to ask question or give us some comments, please do. We have almost 500 participants.
Whoa!
Thank you for coming. Yeah, please feel free to ask questions by open mic or just raise your hands. Yeah, because I see some familiar name like Jonathan Roots, for example. John, it's been a long time, John. So just if you want to ask any question or do you have something in common, because Jonathan also has research on samurai or something. Is John still here? No. Or any other? You want to ask some question?
Don't be shy.
Hello, can you hear me? Is my mic working? Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Great.
Yes, please.
Hi everyone. Great to see you all again, especially after I think it was 2019. You were all at SOAS talking about Indonesian cinema, so it's great to catch up here online. So I was just wondering, obviously you're focusing on films from the 1980s, and there seems to be a renewed interest in these Indonesian films today. Can you see or perhaps you think, perhaps or not, are there any parallels between the global redistribution of these films at the moment and there have been some recent remakes of these older titles, like Gundala came out in 2019.
Yeah. And Satan Slaves as well.
So any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
And Queen of Black Magic.
Oh, Queen of Black Magic, Satan Slave. Yeah.
Yep.
Pete or you want to?
Okay. I don't know. I think there's special cases in a way. I mean, Joko Anwar is very aware of world cinema, very globally aware, you know, and of course his first films were very different from the ones that he's done later. I guess he had to establish himself before he could allow his horror, you know, personality to emerge, you know. And I guess, you know, to be fair to him, I mean, Satan's Slave was his, well, he says, and it was his favorite film as a kid. You know, he loved the film, and it stuck with him. I mean, interestingly, Satan's Slave, when I first read about it, which is in the Aurum book, it was claimed to be, or it was stated as being a remake of is it Phantasm? Is that what it's called, Phantasm?
Yeah, that's what people used to say.
Which it isn't at all, but you know, that stuck with it, that film, you know. So it's a kind of weird kind of way. But I think, you know, Joko just wanted to make a film that would, I can't speak for him, but I think wanted to make a film that would work as an Indonesian horror movie within Indonesian culture, but would also appeal overseas. And the fact that it was also had been released on video by Severin, I think, was coincidental, because that release, I think, came out after his film, or certainly his film was in production at the time, you know. So you know, I don't know. Indonesia may be a special case in this instance, and they're great films, aren't they? You know, the ones that have been remade. You know, so they were sort of crying out to it's like if you've got a song, you know, a great song, and it's been covered by somebody, but it didn't do very well. When somebody else comes along and does a great version of it, you go, wow, you know, it was always good. Now it's kind of better, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I guess because there's sometimes that sense, and I guess, I mean, Eke, you definitely know about this because your PhD partly dealt with this, the sense in which films within an industry become cult when they're exported. There's often that sense in which, okay, yeah, if it reaches a kind of Western audience, who then treat it as a kind of cult film and love certain kinds of genres and styles from a variety of industries. But I think part of what is fascinating with Joko Anwar is that he's kind of representative of the kind of local cult scene and fascination with these films and this history, and is kind of paying tribute to that through these kind of remakes. And I think it helps, I guess, because one of the things I've been trying to work on recently is de-Westernizing cult cinema as a kind of, because there is often that danger that cult is just even if when it's non-Western films, it's still a Western perspective. And so part of what we're doing with that book is getting contributors like yourself, Eke, to try and think through what cult means outside of that Western perspective. And so, part of what we're trying to do is to look at, fans and filmmakers like Joko Anwar, who's kind of representative of very much a cult engagement with cinema, but one that's not filtered necessarily through a Western perspective.
Yeah, thank you. John, while you are on the spotlight, I just want to ask you some question related to Zatoichi, because you wrote something about
I was going to come to another question that I was going to ask you, Eki.
No, you wrote the book. So what do you think about the Blind Sportsman, the Shibuta dari Go Hantu with Zatoichi? Is it remake exploitation, or what do you think?
Sorry, what was that, Eki?
Is the Blind Sportsman, the Shibuta dari Go Hantu, is part of remake exploitation of Zatoichi, or the connection between the Zatoichi?
No, that's an interesting question, because in my book, I guess basically to summarize it up, when I did talk about Shibuta in my Zatoichi book, I was saying, this is essentially because mainly of evidence I got you and Hikmat. Thank you again for hosting that great event, especially the comic books that you presented, showing where in the comic books, first of all, the comic book author had clearly taken influence from Zatoichi, and then this translated over to the Shibuta films. and TV series that happened. Again, interesting parallel there. It's mostly the same actor that has played Sibuta on screen most of the time. Ratno Timur, I think, if I've got the name right. I probably pronounced it wrong. He's played Sibuta the most, and that's kind of an odd parallel with in Japan. In Zatoichi is mostly associated with Shintaro Katsu, who's played him most on film and TV. So there's that odd parallel, and you could argue that Sibuta is a straight rip-off of Zatoichi, but also emphasize the point that I think I have to attribute yet again, Eki, to yourself and Hikmat to say that it was kind of given very much a local flavor. The Sibuta character is very much rooted in Indonesian folklore, so it's not just a straight remake or indeed a blatant rip-off, which I think more clearly comes out in the Taiwanese Zatoichi films, which I also talk about in my book, where it's quite clearly they've just got a lookalike actor. They've made him look exactly the same. Oh, all of a sudden, oh look, and speak Mandarin. It's just Zatoichi in medieval China for some reason, and clearly done as a commercial ripoff. With the Sibuta, they've more clearly minded this to tie it into local mythology, and even at one, maybe 2 points, I know at least there's one film where there's a crossover with Jaka Sembung, isn't there? They have the Sibuta character in Jaka Sembung on screen. So it's very much tied to like the local audience, local interest, local mythology and folklore. So it's a very interesting case study. And it did also lead me, for what little information I could find when I read the book, there were some online rumors that Timo Tjahjanto wanted to remake Sibuta on screen, which I was very interested to hear if there's any news about. And that just leads me to another question I was going to ask Eki. Any news from Indonesia? Is that happening or not? Is it just a rumor?
Which one? Sorry,
Sorry,
I cannot hear you about the what do you think about the rumor?
that was leading me. It was leading me back to another question that I specifically wanted to ask you, Eki. I was finding some news in 2019, maybe a bit after that Timo Tjahjanto apparently wants to remake Sibuta. I didn't know if you knew if that was happening or not.
I think he's still writing the script, because Timo has so many projects, including the Netflix ones and so on. Yeah, hopefully because Indonesia in the last 5 years there are some a phenomenon about reboot, remake, reborn, like the old stuff, they are the old movies. And interestingly, Joko Anwar was the scriptwriter, not the director, for the Queen of Black Magic, and then what else? And another one, but he directed Gundala. So it's been like a phenomenon, like in Indonesian film industry. Many people try to do the remake or reboot, or it's not only the movies, but they wanted to make to sell the movie stars like Benyamin or Warkop, the trio comedy and so on. Okay, thank you very much, John.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eki. Thank you to Ian and Pete as well. It's a great talk. Thank you.
We have question from which one is this one? Please, if you want to ask question, particularly the student, please connect it with our topic, the classic films, like B movies or from Indonesia, and or other transnational exploitation or B movies or cult movies from all over the world. There is a question about Joko Anwar, but I will rewrite the question. But do you have a plan to redistribute current Indonesian films, or do you stick with the old ones? If so, why or why not?
Yeah. Generally, we deal with what they call catalogue films, which is ones that aren't on current release. And it's a bit like antiques in a way, isn't it? If an antique's something that's 100 years old, every year a new bunch of things come into the category. The thing is, with the difference with like new films, like festival films, for example, They don't have very much. What's the word? How can I explain this? They don't have much of a presence in people's kind of psyche. They don't really know what they are, and it might be an interesting film or a new film, an important film or whatever. But you know, if you go on the internet and put the title of the film in, nothing comes up or very little. And I think with the older films, they've kind of established, you know, their right to exist in a way. So they're sort of easier to market, you know. And you put, you know, if you put Asian cult classic or something on a movie, whether it is or not, I mean that's another question. Then people are going to respond to that because they know what Asian movies is. You know, they've got this image in their head. They know what cult movie is, and the covers. You know, got some people, you know, doing chop socky type stuff. Then you know, you're halfway there, aren't you? Really. I wouldn't want to overstate it, and I think the market for these things is relatively small, and it's a market that exists only on video. And there are people who will buy stuff, you know, on video releases and want to collect the whole series. You know, I mean, good for them. I mean, you know, I'm really happy they exist. You know, because that's why we exist. So, but I think it's a limited kind of thing. You know, if these things are available, I mean, I don't really like streaming, for example, for all kinds of reasons. But one of the things is that it makes it. Oh, this sounds very elitist, but I'm going to say it anyway. It makes it too easy to get hold of the things, and they don't value them. I mean, I remember when I was a kid going round, I had to travel to the other side of London and to weird cinemas, you know, to see films because there was no video, you know. There was something in the journey and in the search that made you value it, and that was important. And you were learning something about, you know, life. Maybe that sounds a little bit too pretentious or whatever, but I think that's important. And I think when things are too easily available, when they're on a TV channel, you just push a button and you can watch it. Why should you? Nobody really cares, you know. When you've got a gun, when you're collecting something and it's a bit special and there's not very many of them, if it's a limited edition, I mean, our limited editions are 15, well, sometimes less, but 1,500 copies. But in America, that's a drop in the ocean. That flies so far below the radar that it doesn't exist. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind with a lot of this kind of area, that it's still very, very, it's a niche on a niche, if you like. And I think once it goes beyond that, then it starts to lose some of its power and some of its interest, for me anyway. You know, which is to say, it sounds terribly elitist, but I don't mean it to be. I think, you know, if people value these things because they're kind of unusual and different, and you know, the guy who lives next door hasn't got one.
Okay, thank you.
I guess
something to add,
yeah, I can add something because I guess it relates a little bit to the question in the chat about some of the kind of recent films and the kind of remakes. Because there's the question there about what needs to be developed to advance local horror films internationally, and it makes me think of the various strategies that industries have made over the years to make films that might export. So, for example, like in India with horror films, there was often an attempt to try and kind of downplay some of the local elements to try and make them more global. Like there's always that tension between, oh no, this is too culturally specific. Audiences outside of this country won't get it. So therefore we need to downplay the kind of what's culturally distinctive and kind of make it more global. And often, I guess my feeling is that often doesn't work particularly well because it's often the local cultural specificity that is part of the fascination for audiences outside of the country. So like, for example, there's various kind of Indian horror films that try to kind of downplay Indianness in terms of the content, but it was the formal elements that would put some audiences off. It's the 3 hours in length, it's the songs, it's the extra narrative threads. And so actually you see recent horror films like Tumbad, which huge kind of global success from India. is a film that is very distinctly Indian in terms of the content. Like it's not attempting to kind of downplay that at all. It's very culturally specific, and yet on a formal level, it's a lot closer to kind of global horror kind of storytelling. It's 2 hours in length, or less than 2 hours. It's stylistically, it's a lot closer to horror films from other countries, the US, Europe, Latin America, and so that's often one of the ways is that it's not downplaying the local cultural specificity, because that's often it's those local elements that are part of the appeal. And yeah, as you know, Pete was talking about earlier, that there's that sense in which it's what makes the industry kind of locally distinctive that then is part of what is interesting. Because yeah, Pete mentioned Paul Williman earlier, who's sadly passed away now, but a hugely important film studies scholar. And one of his arguments was for a cosmopolitan cinema. He hated the kind of dominance of Hollywood cinema and was always trying to push for more awareness of world cinema generally. And cosmopolitanism relies on that kind of openness to other cultures. Like it's that attempt to try and engage with and understand other cultures. So I think part of this, the ways in which Indonesian cinema can reach an international audience, is to play into that and is to be part of that kind of cosmopolitan circulation of popular cinema, because otherwise, yeah, I think it's often there's a kind of attempt to downplay the local in order to try and reach a global audience, and I think it often doesn't quite work.
Yeah, you end up with something that satisfies neither demand. You know, I was talking a while back with some Indian producers, and they were wanting to do some, make a film that was, and basically they wanted to take many Indian commercial filmmakers do is take a Western model and Indianize it slightly, but they wanted to make a film that was much more, that did away with a lot of the Indian stuff. And I thought, well, what's the point? The thing that's going to make, exactly as you say, the thing that makes it interesting is this cultural specificity of it. And I think, that's true with Indonesian stuff, the kind of mystical side, the religious side, the martial arts side, those are what I like in Indonesian films. And they're very specific flavored, aren't they? Very, very particular. And I think without that, and obviously the filmmakers we're talking about in Indonesia understand this and know that. And that's a strength, not a weakness,
Okay, following up the answer of Iain, because you discuss remakesploitation, but I don't think you mentioned about Lady Terminator, Pembalasan Ratu Laut Selatan, because in some point the movie is the rip-off of the Terminator, but on the other hand, the filmmaker, put some, mystical things and, like local, you call it a cultural specificity, So is this suitable fit in your definition of remakesploitation, or try to localizing and something, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a perfect example of exactly what we're talking about, I think, in the sense that, yeah, it's taking a kind of global model, it's taking the kind of plot of Terminator, various elements of the style and iconography and even specific sequences, but then, yeah, mixing it with the story of the South Seas Queen, and then, yeah, replacing some sci-fi elements with more supernatural elements. But then, yeah, making a film that then, yeah, has a kind of international interest, is exported successfully, and still has an interest today. Like there are still festivals have been doing screenings of 35mm prints of Lady Terminator, and for me it's that interest in where the global meets the local. It's like it's a perfect illustration of that process of like that American cultural imperialism and colonization. It doesn't end at the point at which the Hollywood films are dominating the box office and everyone has seen American cinema and eats at McDonald's and drinks Coke, like, because all of these elements are then being appropriated, adapted, reworked, localized. And it's often those local elements that then help those films to then be exported. So yeah, I think Lady Terminator is a perfect example of this. And yeah, one of the things I've been doing more recently is trying to get funding to help help some of these films be restored and screened and gain distribution, working with Pete and others. And so yeah, a film like Lady Terminator is exactly the kind of film that fits that model of remakesploitation.
Okay, thank you, Iain and Pete. Is there any question from the floor? Any other question? There is a question about horror movies related with religion, so probably we can relate it to, because in Indonesia we have Kawin and so on, but in the classic ones, you mentioned about Satan or something like the Turkish exorcism, right? Is it Quran that I saw? Just it's not the Bible, but it's Quran,
Well, exactly, yeah. So it kind of, so it's the Quran. It's a lot of the kind of religious iconography changes. There's also a few minor changes to the plot. So the kind of main character is not a kind of priest who's losing his faith kind of character. It's more he's a kind of secular researcher. So it's kind of localized into trying to work through those tensions in Istanbul between secularism and religion and tradition and modernity. So yeah, the main character is now a kind of secular researcher who is unconvinced by anything that is seen to be kind of aspects of kind of superstition, what he sees as superstition. And so then, but then of course, in the plot of The Exorcist, as it is in the remake, he then has to kind of come to terms with the presence of supernatural elements in the world. And so his kind of very secular worldview is slightly challenged by the plot. And so yeah, I think religion is a fascinating aspect of these films, and also many of the recent Turkish horror films similarly have religion at the forefront. And again, that's part of what you're kind of taking a model of horror films that's borrowing from the US, from East Asia, from various different countries. But then it's often that there's a kind of local distinctive cultural specificity that then feeds into the popular cinema.
Okay.
I've always thought that one of the reasons why it took a long time, and maybe still hasn't happened in India, for horror movies to become an accepted genre is due to the fact that the religious aspects of life or whatever in India are taken much more seriously. They're much more part of people's lives than they are in the West, for example. I think it was, with not the death of religion, but with the religion becoming less important in the West, that we needed horror movies to remind us of these kinds of mystical things. I think and I don't know much about Indonesian culture, but I think it's the same there, that the whole mystical religious thing is still quite strong. And you deal with those things with caution. I think is what I'm saying. And it's the same in India. You couldn't use an awful lot of that religious stuff that's very present to people and very important to them. You have to be careful with it. And I think maybe that's why the horror movies that we did get in India avoided all of that, and they were just monster movies, really.
Yeah, even Joko Anwar include religion aspect, like grave torture, the new ones, put some, because it's
very much part of Indonesian movies. I mean, Queen of Black Magic, at the end, I don't know what the remake is like. I haven't seen it actually, but at the end of Queen of Black Magic, the original, it's an Islamic priest or scholar, isn't it, that comes to sort out the evil presence, the black magic. I mean, interesting in mystics in Bali, that's of course Balinese religion, isn't it? It's not Islam, which is kind of
it's Hindu.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's possibly unique in Indonesia, is it, that film having that Balinese Buddhist kind of mythology? Is that probably the only one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unusual.
Yeah, the Hinduan. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for staying with us. We have 524 participants. Is there any other question related to classic exploitation B movies or cult movies from Indonesia who went global? Just wondering, since the title of our webinar is the second wave, do you think the phenomenon will happen, in the 5-10 years ahead, like more not only Indonesian titles but more, the titles from other side of the world will get, redistributed?
Yes, and I think there's a economic, if that's the right word, reason for it. When we started doing this, when companies started re-releasing these older movies, there was a certain bit of caution and so on. You first of all, you went for the ones that you thought were the best, and you worked your way through those and so on, and then you would go to the second wave, the second tier, the third. It became more and more obscure because it's difficult to find. There's only a certain number of films made.
Yeah.
We're talking Italy, Spain, to an extent France and the UK, which produced horror movies in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Eventually, you find that you've reached the bottom of the well. There's no more, there's no water in it. So you have to move to the field next door, and you start, getting the water from that source. And I think that, I mean, this is probably a personal thing, and I sound a bit sour or jaded about it, but we kind of had that to ourselves for a while, without possibly realizing that, or making an issue of that. And now, of course, it's wide open. As we say, people are starting to, producers are starting to realize that these films have a market in their own country as well as overseas. So they're starting to restore the films themselves. Because for me, that was always an issue. Certainly if you're based in the UK, releasing films in the UK, the cost of doing this is astronomical. It's huge. And as you license for, say, 5 or, if you're lucky, 7 years, you're basically, it's like the next door neighbor says, you say to the next door neighbor, can I borrow your car or whatever? And they say, yes, but you've got to take it down to the paint shop and give it and repaint it and change the engine before you bring it back, and it's kind of like that. But I think now people are looking further afield, and which is good. I can't deny that. And I think a lot of interesting stuff will be coming out, but it's largely to do with the fact that the well has run dry in our home territories, that you have to look overseas. Which is exactly what Iain was saying, cultural imperialism and all the rest of it. I mean, we're all engaged in that, empire building and cultural imperialism. But it's on a small level, compared to the mainstream. It's a small level, and I think for purchasers, for consumers, it's going to be nothing but good. Because you're getting to see things that you maybe have read about, heard about, but you've never seen, and now you can see all these films from countries around the world, and that can't be a bad thing. It has to be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think I mean, in a way there is a kind of like a golden age of kind of availability for some of these films on like amazing lavish Blu-ray editions with extras, and like you're all these films that maybe you'd read about, maybe you'd heard something about at some point. As people are kind of distributors, like Vinegar Syndrome, people like that are they're kind of looking out for more and more material to be restored, and then working with production companies who are already then in the process of maybe getting the materials ready for showing on TV or streaming. And I guess there's the tension then with with a wider move towards streaming, like there's this golden age of the kind of physical media at the point at which physical media is also under threat, where it is definitely a kind of niche market, but it's a niche market who are really excited that Special Silencers is finally coming out on this beautiful HD release, and will be first in line to buy a copy. And so yeah, I feel like that's going to continue. There are more and more releases become available, and yeah, I've just kind of, I guess, dipped my toe in it a little bit in terms of trying to work out yeah, costs of restoration, negotiating rights, finding materials, and it's such a kind of headache doing all the stuff that Pete's been doing for years. Like it's
Look what it's
amazing.
done to me. I'm only 21 years old. I mean, one thing which occurs to me about what you're saying, and in fact, generally this discussion. I remember when I went to, I've had this experience in other countries, but when I went to India years ago and met Tulsi Ramsey and so on, and a lot of other people involved with the filmmaking business there, and when I was talking to them about why these things are not really taken very seriously in their home countries in particular even, somebody said to me, I think it was a critic who said to me, well, you've got to understand that, there's the cultural elite, the middle classes and beyond, they're kind of scared of these films in a way, because when you come from the West and you want to talk about these films, they think that you're trying to equate them with those movies which they think are dumb. In other words, you're trying to say, look, you guys, you've made these dumb, silly movies that taxi drivers go to see. What's it all about? And so they separate themselves off and they say, we're interested in those films. They're trash, they're crap, and have no interest to anybody. And I think that's kind of an issue. And I think that's changing.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first went to Turkey many years ago to talk to Giovanni Scolimillo about all this stuff, to interview him, the man who saves the world wasn't really discussed at all. It wasn't known in the West, and we wrote about it. And I'm not saying that I'm responsible for that, but it started to be discussed. People started to talk about it. I remember when the Mondo Macabro book came out and was interviewed by an American writer, and he wanted to. There was questions like in the Turkish Star Wars and the American Star Wars, had a fight, who would win? That kind of thing. I was like, that's not the point at all. But it's the kind of level on which people take some of these things. But I think it's gone beyond that now, and I think we can appreciate these films for we can enjoy these films for what they are. And I think it's changing in the countries. That's changed the reaction in the countries themselves. People are prepared to talk about this film. It's a cultural icon of some sort. I mean, The Man Who Saves the World there was a plan to remake it. I don't know if did it actually happen. I remember Junaid Arkin telling me about this. That hey, they're going to remake this film. Did that happen?
They did a sequel. They did The Son of the Man Who Saves the World.
Oh, okay, so it happened. Yeah, I've never seen it. I don't think I've seen it.
It's not good. Yeah, because they were trying to take advantage of is it Gora, the kind of sci-fi comedy that had been a hit. So they were like, okay, let's do Man Who Saves the World. But with the kind of special effects and style of that's more up to date. But it didn't work at all.
Cheap digital effects. Now you mention it, I think I might have seen it, but I've erased it from my memory because it was so awful.
Yeah.
I interviewed Chetan Inanch about that film years ago, and he said something. I said, "What do you think the Americans would say if they saw this?" And he said, "Oh, I think they'd be proud, they'd be honored, because what I'm saying to them is, I want to make a science fiction film. What's the best science fiction film? It's Star Wars. So I've used bits of that in my film to praise you, to show how much I appreciate this." I kind of said, well, I think, he said, when I walk down the street looking to buy a new fridge or a new TV, the best ones you can find are the American ones, and it's the same with cinema. I think he was probably being a bit satirical with that remark, but I can see where he was coming from, what he meant. And I said, well, I think Lucas films may have a slightly different attitude towards that. But the damage that A Man Who Saved the World did to Star Wars is minimal. It's non-existent. You know, they're two totally different entities, aren't they? And it's a shame in a way that those things. And it's the same with the Turkish Spider-Man film. You know, the Three Mighty Men. It's a shame these things can't be allowed to exist side by side because they're so different. And it's no different in a way from somebody, you know, in music, from somebody taking an idea from one musical culture and using it in another. And you make something that's different. It's a hybrid or whatever, but it's a created entity in its own right, isn't it? And I think that's should be the case with these films, and hopefully that will happen in the future when your project starts to become reality.
Yeah.
I mean, for that. Okay, the other question will be the last question. Here I see Sigit Pradityo. Wah, Sigit hilang deh. Sigit's short films are available on Trauma apps ya. What do you call it? Trauma. And he's also a fan of some classic Indonesian cult movies. Sigit, do you want to ask a question or something? Or comment?
Can I ask a question about is there a new wave of cinema that Vinegar and Mondo Macabro distributed? The new wave, not the old one?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Oh, okay. Yeah, just the old ones, right? Like the Mystic and Bali, Lady Terminator, and
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, like
For the reasons I mentioned earlier, I think that the old ones have a sort of patina, and they, you know, it's like if you get an antique and you could take it somewhere, and somebody can make a copy of it exactly the same, but it wouldn't be the same because it doesn't have that age, that patina. You know, that stuff's like a relic from the past, isn't it? You know, there's all kinds of interesting things, the way people talk, the clothes, you know, what the back if there's a city scene, what it looks like in the background, you know, the cars, it's all changed. It's a nostalgia thing, really, isn't it? To an extent, a nostalgia thing.
all right.
And at the same time, this kind of styles also appears in other countries' cinema, like Turkish ones, or you know, like the physical effect, something like that. It's not CGI, so it's like we have a sense of like the old things, you know, old classic ones.
Yeah, I mean, I love that in Mystics in Bali. You know, when there's sort of things that are kind of drawn on the film. You know, like the you know, the power lines from the hands and all that kind of stuff, and the laser effects. I mean, now it's so, because you don't get that anymore. I mean, now it's so high tech, you know, and sort of seamless. So when you see that, it's like a piece of folk art, isn't it? Really, it's wonderful to see that stuff, and it's all done by hand. You know, all the stuff is made by hand, like El Badrun making all that stuff. It's absolutely wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I think Mondo Macabro haven't seen my movie and Azam movie, right? About laser stuff, right?
No.
Yes, Mr.
Send it over.
Yeah.
I will send it. That's invitation from Pete, yeah. Because Sigit's style and you know, Kolong Cinema style, they have like a homage, you know, a tribute to the old movies. So.
Oh yeah, please do. I'm serious. Please send it over.
Yeah,
I will send to Mr. Eki, and then Mr. Eki will send it to you, right? Okay.
Yeah, he's got my details. Get the details off him.
Yeah.
Yes, my.
I will share Pete's email address if you want. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good one.
Good
one.
Good luck for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, because they are it's short movies, but it looks like, you know, it's so bad. It's good thing, you know, like the Sigit and the Kolong Cinema and the Javora. I mean, the Blingwood, yeah, you know, they have some sense of, you know, homage to the old movies.
Sounds good.
Okay. Is there any other question? Probably, Iain, could you please elaborate more about the upcoming projects, about the book collection?
All right, yeah.
The collection, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got edited collection. Yeah, I mean, I'm right now, I seem to be juggling too many projects, but yeah, one's, yeah, it's called Global Cult Cinema, Decolonizing Cult Film Studies. And yeah, it's precisely what we were talking about earlier, trying to think about cult cinema, trying to have a kind of global sense of cult cinema, and not just in terms of the films themselves, but also in their reception. So not just thinking about how the films have been received in the UK and in the US, but then also the kind of cult fandom as it exists within other countries around the world. Because I think, yeah, like if we're thinking about, I don't know, the cult cinema of Pakistan, for example, often there would be a sense in which, okay, yeah, here's some fascinating films, and we'll show them in the UK and the US, and the kind of audiences who love cult Italian films and cult Turkish films might also now be interested in watching cult films Pakistan. But then to think about, well, no, what's the kind of cult reception within Pakistan itself? Which it still has that cross-cultural element. It's not like, there's an element where the fandom in one country is then influencing the fandom in another country. But yeah, that's what that project is trying to do.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Is there any other question? Last opportunity to ask questions. If not, let's do the group photo and then the exit ticket. Yeah, for Rakesh, for the committee, please share the exit ticket for BINUS students. Yeah. Okay, I think that's the end of our discussion. Thank you very much, Pete and Iain, and all 525 participants. I hope it's a fruitful discussion, and we will upload it to BINUS Films YouTube channel. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Eki. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Okay,
Thank you.
Rakesh, please do the Miss Adia. Please share the exit tickets, and then we do the group photo. I will do the gallery, right? This is the exit ticket for BINUS students, yeah. After I will give everyone like 1 or 2 minutes to scan, and then we will go to the group photo. Actually, I got involved in some titles, yeah, all titles, but new re-release, but I cannot spill the titles yet. The Indonesian exploitation. Pete, is there any second wave of non-Indonesian ones, like from the ones that from Argentina or Brazil or Hong Kong? Your new releases, or
Hong Kong has been a difficult one for us. I don't know why. It was one of my first kind of loves, really. But we've never really made inroads into Hong Kong. We've got some coming up. Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay. I think a lot of those films don't exist anymore. The climate is not kind. It's the same in the Philippines. I've tried, and I've been there, and I've tried and talked to people, and I've tried many times to break that particular one, but I think it's an archive and storage. In a lot of countries, it's true in Indonesia, isn't it? That archiving and storing old films was not really something that people did. It was done on a sort of enthusiast amateur kind of level, but it wasn't done, with state resources, government resources. It wasn't considered to be appropriate. So a lot of those films don't exist. I mean, I get sent quite often, people will send me lists of Indonesian films that they've seen on video CD from Malaysia. And I say, well, yeah, that's fine, but that's all that exists. You can't find a copy of that film. I wish we could, So I don't know, it's difficult.
Yeah. Because I remember in 2015, when we did the double degree, we screened the like the Terminator. And then you remember that you had abandoned cans of Killing of Satan in one of your warehouse, and then we screened the films in 35 millimeters, and that was one of yeah. Do you have plan to to
That's
re-release
a,
it DVD?
no, I'm still trying. I'm still trying. I mean, that's a great film, that one. But it's difficult because the 35mm that we had, that we bought from the producer, it had Spanish subtitles burnt into it.
Oh, it's yeah.
Which was great when we screened it at Sitges, you know, in Spain. They loved it, you know, but we couldn't release it on video with the burnt-in subtitles. And I've spent, you know, ever since then, I've tried to find a proper version of it, and so far I've failed. But it's definitely on the list. You have to be careful talking about these things, because when you mention it, then somebody else thinks, "Hey, that's a good idea." I'll go,
Sorry.
"No, I'm not. I'm not. I don't. You know, I'm not being serious." But you know, there is a level of that, isn't there? You know, yeah.
Okay.
But finding materials is the biggest problem with all of these
Oh,
areas.
okay. Good. Okay, Rakesh, thank you. The exit ticket, I think is enough. We can go do the group photo right now. We have 19 slides, yeah. Rakesh, could you
Okay.
see? Yeah, do you see? Yeah, we have 19. Just
Okay.
so don't move, yeah, everybody.
All right, don't move, everybody. Okay. Okay. Wait. Okay. Here we go. One, two. First slide.
Yes. So I think we will just stay still until tomorrow morning
Yeah.
because we have 19 slides. Okay, Rakesh, carry on. How many slides left?
Still on 6.
Okay. It's quick enough. It's a bit quiet here. Rakesh, how many left? Dihitung dong. Just make
Okay.
a countdown. This is
11.
the 11. Okay.
We're on 11.
So we know the progress.
Okay. Sorry.
1.
12.
Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
One more, sir.
Yeah.
And that's all.
Thank you. Thank you,
Ah.
Rakesh. Thank you, participants.
Move again.
That was the
500.
most difficult bit
Thank
of
you,
the
Ian and Pete.
entire
Yeah.
event.
Yeah. See you in another event. Just text me if you are around Indonesia, and hopefully I can see you around in Indonesia or in London.
Yes.
Okay, everybody, that's the end
Fantastic.
of our webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Stay. And have a great lunch. Yeah, it's lunch time, right?
It is.
That's true. Yeah. I'll go and get
Hear
lunch
my
now.
stomach
Almost
rumbling.
dinner here. Is here, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm off.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you
for
very
that.
much. See you
See you
later.
both soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye
Keep
now.
in touch. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ian. Oke, semua udah ya, Rakesh ya? Aman ya?
Aman, sir.
Oke.
Ini udah end aja.
Oke. Ya, and meeting for all aja. Thank you tuh teman-teman
Thank
semua.
you, thank you.
Thank you, Mas Gugun, Mas Sigit.
Thank you.
Thank you.